no matter how much you know about your topic or how much you know about your subject area, your grades are always going to be limited by ultimately how clearly you can communicate the knowledge that you're writing. So I've known so many talented, intelligent students that come to me with like such great ideas and thoughts and really understand the topic, but often are absolutely not able to communicate their thought process on paper to the lecturer in order to access all the marks available. So it's really important that we, as early as possible, figure out how we want to do academic writing in a way that ensures that every mark that's available is being recognized in our writing, right? So I like to think of kind of academic writing less as a formula. I know that there's lots of like different formulas and structures and things you can do and processes and approaches, but I'm not a big fan of that. I don't think life works like that. I mean, the reality is sometimes you're going to have a couple of weeks to get something together, and sometimes you've got to get something together between two or three other courseworks or assignments, and you might only have 2 or 3 days to do it, right? So my thought process is, how do we get it done, or how do we make sure we've ticked off the most important things that by the end of us, putting something together, we know that this is at least of a standard and a quality that would attract as many marks as it possibly can, right? So let's go through this. The first one and the most important thing when it comes to academic writing isn't even about the writing itself. It all starts with the question. And my big thing is, don't just answer the question, answer their question. Look, it doesn't matter how well you write if you're not answering the question that's been set by the lecturer. And the biggest thing I realized when I was coming up in my undergraduate days was I would write these big answers and the lecturer will always come back with feedback saying, this is really informative, but it hasn't answered the question. Now, in order to make sure that you're answering the question, there's a couple of things that you can do. Number one, make sure that you have clarified the question with your lecturer. And this doesn't have to be face to face. It can be through class discussion. But something as small as, do you want us to look at this topic in the width and the breadth of the topic? So meaning looking at lots of different things and pulling it together. Or do you want me to look at this topic in a more narrow viewpoint, so just focusing on one aspect? Something like that can bring a lot of clarity and actually make all the difference in the world as to what you need to focus on. Another way to think about this is, in every question, you're going to have instructional terms or assessment verbs. So if you type in instructional terms in Google right now, or assessment verbs, I can give you a moment to do that. Welcome back. You should see a list of words that are more or less instructing you to the type of answer that the lecturer is looking for. So it could be to describe, to explain, to outline. It might be to critically analyze. It could be to theorize. It could be to justify, to evaluate, to recommend. Whatever these words are that you can notice within the question, that is the signal that's telling you this is the type of answer that the lecturer is looking for. And if you look at my previous video around the core 4 skills, whatever that term is, it's going to link back to you demonstrating one of those core 4 skills in a greater or lesser capacity. So if it is asking you to describe, to outline, to explain, ultimately the lecturer is probably looking for more of your knowledge and understanding of a topic or a concept. If it's asking you to analyze, to critically reflect, to review, to evaluate, to recommend, then it's looking for the higher or deeper level learning skills such as analysis, synthesis, critical thinking, judgment, academic judgment, right? And evaluation skills. So right off the bat is, let's have a good look at the question. Before we write anything, let's have a good look at the question. Number 2, write how the lecturer reads. Okay. This is really, really, really important because often we come to academic writing just thinking, I need to get some words and some letters on a page. I've got to hit this word count. I've got to, make a statement or a case for. And that is probably not the best way to look at it. The better way to think about this is your lecturer is going to be marking your script out of another 60, 75, maybe even 100 other scripts. And they need to be able to pick up very quickly what it is that you're talking about and if you're meeting the assessment criteria. And they need to be able to do that in like seconds. So your job actually is to make it as easy and as simple for them to do so as you can. And a big way to do that is to write in the way that your lecturer is going to read. And so I'll give you an example. One aspect of that is writing your introduction. So many people, when they come to do an essay, they start at the introduction. And I would say never start at the introduction. It was some advice that my previous supervisor gave me, and it's always helped me since. Remember, you're coming to the topic having to research stuff about it, and you won't start at the introduction phase. That's why often you're in this place where you're like, what do I write? What do I even write for my first sentence? And that's because you don't know yet, because you haven't done the reading, you haven't done the research, you haven't looked at the whole picture. So I would say don't start from the beginning, don't start from the introduction, start from your first point and make that the beginning. The first point to answer the question. And that's going to be typically in your main body. If it's a report, it might be somewhere else. But write down the first point that you want to get across to the reader. And then the second point, and then the third point, but start in the middle of it, okay? And what that's going to do is start to help you understand what your answer actually looks like. So by the time you go back to write the introduction, you already know what you're introducing. You know the first point, you know the second point, you know the third point, and so you can start to say, this essay will explore X, Y, and Z because you've done it. So that's a big one. And so remembering that when you're writing that introduction, this is going to be your lecturer's first impression of the work. Not so much of you, okay, because most of it's anonymized in most universities, but of your work. And first impressions mean everything. So imagine if you was walking down the street and you saw someone looking a bit scruffy, their hair was out of place, you'd be like, are you okay? Is everything okay? Right? Because first impressions do matter. And it's the exact same with your academic writing. I would say the first paragraph to 2 paragraphs can be the most important because it's what your lecturer is going to see, and it will dictate whether consciously or unconsciously what their perception of the rest of this work is going to look or feel like. Remembering that you're talking to a lecturer that's probably marked over 1,000 scripts by the time they see yours. So very quickly they can see if your academic writing is going to be on point or not. So that's why I think you should take dedicated time to write your introduction. Again, your introduction should be roughly about 10% of the overall word count. And it's really there to not, don't put lots of words in just for the sake of it. It's to tell the reader what they're about to read. It is to introduce the reader to the main and most important things that you're about to share with them in response to the question. So where you can, just go straight into the background of the question, the most important points that you're going to cover. Maybe share an order that you're going to do this, then you're going to do that, and then you're going to do this. Ordering is really powerful in the introductory phase. If you could imagine, even if we sit down and we had a meeting and you said to me, okay, thanks for joining this meeting. I'm now going to take you through this, and then we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to finish with this. Immediately, that makes a person feel, oh, okay, you know what you're talking about, right? So if you can, right at the beginning of that introduction, or even if at the end of your introduction, so either at the beginning or at the end, start to go into, this is going to be covered, then this, and then that. And that is a really powerful way to let the reader know you know what you're going to be writing about. So that's number 2. Number 3, Your lecturer wants your viewpoint and not your opinion. Now, this is so important, and there's a lot of confusion out there around the difference between a viewpoint, an academic viewpoint, and an opinion. So put it this way, an opinion is putting forward something that you deem to be true, but has no evidence base, right? There is no research to back it up. There is no citations. There's not even articles or any kind of evidence to say that what you're saying is true. Ultimately, what your lecturer is looking for is your ability to research the evidence that already exists out there on that topic and to then put that forward in the paper, because they're looking for your research skills, not your opinion making skills. Hope that makes sense. So for example, let's use an example. So they might say, okay, you might say, during the pandemic, student satisfaction of universities plummeted and students really hated their experience at uni during the pandemic. Now, if you just said that without any evidence or research or anything, then that would be your opinion, right? Because we don't know if that is true or not. But if you said that and you said supported by, and there's a citation to the National Union of Students, which showed a decrease from 70% satisfaction to 30% satisfaction between 2020 and 2021, all of a sudden that becomes an academic viewpoint because you have gone and done the research and put forward a view of the topic. And so you want to make sure with your writing, whatever your discipline is, that you are always bringing the evidence to the fore. Now, evidence can come in lots of different ways, and I'm going to create a short video series on like how to produce the most credible research, but you need to just make sure just getting the evidence out there, that is a citation, that this is where this has come from, for about every 100 words is a really important thing to keep mind of as you're doing your writing. So around every 100 words, you want to just check in with yourself and say, have I made any statements, any claims that are unverifiable, that are unjustifiable, that aren't coming from anywhere? Now, you might be sitting there thinking, hang on, Nathan, what about like my own intellectual capability? Like, aren't I supposed to show my intellectual capacity and put forward my own kind of viewpoints, my own, opinions without any evidence? So I would say this, rarely your lecturer is looking for that, definitely in the early years of your degree. So first year, maybe foundation year, it's going to be rare that they just want your sole opinion. But even when that is the case, it's normally because you've gone out on a research project, either a dissertation or, you've worked on something and actually produced some research to support it. What I will say is you need to understand that you're given marks not for what you can conjure up from your own thought processes, which I'm sure at some point, if you want to be an academic, a scholar, a researcher, PhD, so forth, you would be, which kind of goes into grounded theory and all of that. But for now, it's your ability to look at what's already there and produce a new viewpoint. And I think that's the learning that lecturers most want to see. And it doesn't always have to be a new viewpoint, but a credible viewpoint, a strong viewpoint. And so one of the things I will often say to my students is, don't just think of right and wrong, which obviously there's that, but also think about strong and weak, right? So by being able to look at the strength of the thing that you're putting forward or the weakness of it, that also helps your academic writing immensely. Right, so the next one is, remember, when you come to do your academic writing, remembering that you're writing for the reader and not for yourself. A good thing to get knowledge of very early in the process is, why am I writing this? Is it, and again, it's rarely going to be to get marks or just because there's something you have to do part of your degree. It's going to be motion generally to either inform the reader, to advise the reader, or give recommendations to the reader, okay, or guidance to the reader. And all three of these things are very different things in their own way. So giving information, we're talking about descriptions, outlines, explanations, just giving info about a topic, right? That's your knowledge and understanding marks. But when we go into advisory and guidance and recommendations, now we're talking about analytical thinking. Now we're thinking about analysis. Now we're thinking about synthesis. Now we're thinking about critical or critique. Now we're thinking about evaluative statements and judgments and justifications. If you're going to give advice, well, you often in the real world, if you're giving advice in a professional capacity, you literally have to make sure that that advice is the best and most thorough advice you can give and won't cause harm, right? In whatever sphere or discipline you're doing. So you got to also come with that mindset if that's what your lecturer is looking for. How can I advise based on the most recent up-to-date information the best way forward? When we're talking about giving recommendations, you're now saying the reader should do something specifically in order to address a problem or to solve an area or to respond to the question that's been given. And so again, you've got to make sure that recommendation is founded upon some clear thinking or process that you've demonstrated in your writing before, right? So you don't just get to a recommendation without there being a link to why that recommendation is important. And so you need to have this at the top of your mind when you start to embark on your academic writing. So just asking, is this to inform, to advise, or to guide, or to recommend, is a really powerful question to know up front. And B, I've had students come back to me, said the lecturer said all three. So be aware that could be a case as well. And lastly, when you've written what you needed to write, you've done your introduction, main body, or whatever the sections are in the report, whatever it may be, leave, then read. Leave, then read. So often when we get writing, we get so glued into our writing that we start to experience something called banner blindness. That is, we don't see our own errors and mistakes because we've kind of seen them too many times. So they kind of fade out on the screen to us. So one way that you can avoid that is to leave the screen completely and do something else completely. And I would say for at least a couple of hours so your mind can just reset. But then to add with that is to then come back and just read what you've written, but to do so in a PDF format. So for some reason, you could do this in PDF. You might want to do this in a Word doc, but really large. But for some reason, when you put the text out on a PDF document, which makes it really big, really clear, the mistakes or the errors are just glaringly obvious. Or even the content that you think, actually, that doesn't need to be there, I'm repeating myself, that becomes so much more apparent. So to do that as well will enhance your academic writing for first class grades. Look, I'm wishing you all the best in your degree, and I will be sending more videos on how to achieve your best through academic writing over this year. Okay, have a good one. Bye-bye.